Welcome to the Work Matters podcast. In each episode, talking with thought leaders and executives, Purpose Works founder Thomas Bertels explores what it takes to make work more productive, valuable, impactful, and meaningful. Let's begin the conversation.
Welcome to the Work Matters podcast. My guest today is Niels Pflaeging. Niels is a management exorcist. He's also the founder of Red 42, which is a consulting firm, as well as the Beta Codex. You started your career in finance. You lived for over a decade in Brazil. You spent 5 years in New York. You've been around the globe, so to speak. Welcome to the show, Niels.
Thank you for inviting me, Thomas. It's a pleasure.
I met Niels a couple of years ago, I think, as you were talking about one of your books, Complexitoden. And right, for viewers, right, here's a view. And I've been really impressed with your work. I think you have a really interesting take on organizational development that we don't see too much. So maybe just jumping right in, Niels, what is the Beta Codex?
You interviewed a couple of people whom I am acquainted with. My former colleague Bjarte Borgsnes from the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable. You did a great interview with him, by the way. And a dear friend of mine, Bill Pasmo from New York. I just have to mention other people when explaining what the Beta Codex is, because the Beta Codex, it has long roots in history. What we really did in 2008 when we created the Beta Codex Network and the Beta Codex as a set of principles is that we took the work previously done by the Beyond Budgeting movement, of which I had been a part as well. I was a Beyond Budgeting Roundtable director for 7 years. And at the time in the Beyond Budgeting movement, we had already figured out that, an alternative to command and control needed to exist. It had to exist. It existed in organizations. So we wanted to understand them. But the name Beyond Budgeting was never right. It was always wrong. It was off, it was off key, so to speak. And because it seemed to suggest that this was a financial management thing or a planning thing or so. And Beyond Budgeting was always, as my mentor at the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable at the time always liked to highlight, it was about decentralization. So we picked up that theme when we rebaptized the concept Beta Codex and reshaped it, reformulated it, and took it further. We wanted to highlight that this model of organizing, Beta, it is different than Alpha, command control, the pyramid model of organizing that we all know, Taylorism and so on. We now call that model management, the social technology, which is a bad thing, a terrible thing in complexity and working with human beings. So we took this idea that the whole world is beta, the world is never complete, nothing is ever ready. Organizations are living systems, teams are living systems, markets are living systems. Everything is in perpetual beta. And at the time, my now ex-wife, she worked at Google, and she said, at Google, not only our products are in beta, but the whole organization is always in beta. So we took this idea and said, okay, this is what this model is about. What we have been calling Beyond Budgeting, it should be called Beta. And that's what we did. So since 2008, we have been calling it the Beta Codex. We have reshaped the principles, reformulated the principles a couple of times. And what was missing 15 years ago in the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, and what's also missing in the agile movement, the lean movement, what was missing in the total quality movement, that some of your viewers might also relate to. Those movements were always missing. Maybe they didn't dare to approach organizational transformation and to believe that every organization should be like that, lean, agile, decentralized, democratic, this kind of thing. And at the time, now 14 years ago, when we founded the Beta Codex Network, we were convinced that organizational transformation was necessary and possible. We hadn't figured out how to do it. And I think now we have figured it out. So Beta Codex is the Beta Codex movement or the Beta Codex Network, and the concept Beta Codex is about describing this different model of organizing, which is not like a pyramid, but more like a peach, decentralized. And it's also about how to make the transformation from alpha to beta, from Taylorism to post-Taylorism happen. And to make this available to everybody. That's the let's say, the approach that we take or the belief that we have. This must be for everyone. It must be open source.
Yeah, I think that's probably the bigger part, right? I mean, I think the principles, the insights, as you say, right, have been around for, in some cases, 50, 60, 70 years, right? We've known a lot about this, but we also, I think, realized that it's really, really hard to change organizations because, right, we're dealing with human beings.
And this is where the trouble starts. And you just put that beautiful. It must be hard, right? But what if it isn't hard? What if it's sweet and juicy and fast? And this has come, this insight. I mean, I may sound like a lunatic, but I'm not an esoteric in esoterics at all. Much to the contrary. This assumption that change is hard, changing organization is hard. It really comes, I believe, I think I know. It comes from our flawed approaches to change that we have perpetuated over and over. So in the real world, change is easy. Change is not hard. We want to change. People want to change. But in change management, we have done it all wrong. And that's why we have created catastrophe.
If what we're changing towards was better, I think very few people would have an issue with that. I think what I find in most organizations is when we need to resort to like change management is oftentimes because we got to sell something that's actually not really great for the people who do the work, right? So we got to market it, we got to create a campaign, we got to sell it to people, and again, it's like to your point that oftentimes doesn't work. Right? People are pretty smart.
I mean, I started this line of work in the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable in 2003, so 19 years ago, a long time ago, I think. And when we started in Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, we started this trying to bring into practice because we researched the model in the first 5 or so years in the Beyond Budgeting movement. We tried to understand the model, the future model, the alternative to command and control. The pyramid model of managing and command and control is bad. There is an alternative model. We were able to describe it, but then the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable had corporate members, corporations, organizations, also public organizations, institutions financing this research work. And they were very timid to put this to work because we had also had these screws in our head saying it's hard, it's dangerous to do this kind of transformation. So we were stuck in that mode of I think the Beyond Budgeting model very well describes what the alternative to command and control is. But there were some pieces missing, and a clear understanding of how to pull off very fast organizational transformation. That was clearly missing.
This has been well researched, and there's plenty of evidence that this works. And you're saying it's also easy, right? We're making it maybe seem too daunting. So what is holding leaders back from embracing these principles? We're living in a complex world. Things are changing all the time. Traditional organizations are not very well suited to deal with this rate of change. So why not? What's holding them back?
I would say that the easy answer is our reflexes are terrible. Everything that most of the things we believe about organization is wrong. Let's say the science of organizations is utterly flawed. There's a lot of business school bashing around for decades. Henry Mintzberg wrote a great exhaustive book about this in 2006, I think, calling to abolish the MBA and so on. But so the wrong thinking, the wrong theory, it has been taught in business schools forever, has been practiced in organizations forever, and the right ideas. My younger son, he studies physics now, and physics is so great, right? In physics, when there's a new and better theory, those people who can defend this new and better theory have to struggle for a couple of years. But at a certain point, the new and better theory makes the old and worse theory obsolete, and that kind of gets into the history books, And in organizational studies, in management, in business, it's not like that at all. It's like you never get a stick into the ground. The old prejudices and the wrong theory, it never gets out of people's head. I give an example. There was a terrible, terrible organizational concept, management by objectives, very popular in the 70s and 80s. I mean, it was the worst idea that Peter Drucker ever suggested and became his most successful one. It's really a terrible story, The worst idea that Peter Drucker ever uttered became a famous industry, management by objectives. That died away in the 2000s, I think. It became unfashionable. Now it's back. It's like hipstered, hipstered. Not sure how to. Yeah, it's the zombie of management by objectives. It put on new clothes, and it's now called OKRs. So, and that happened like matrix structures, a terrible concept from the 1980s, created in Sweden or Switzerland, nobody knows it. It has been rebaptized into the Spotify model and into SAFe, and a supposedly agile concept and so on. So the terrible concepts, they do not fade away. They're not going into the museum or in the garbage heap of history. They keep coming back at us. It's terrible. The most important idea for business, I think, that was ever uttered in the last 70 years or so, McGregor's theory Y versus theory X. We still, that book was published in 1960, so it has been 62 years ago. And at the time, McGregor said very accurately, theory X human beings exist only in the back of our head. They are as dirty prejudice against other people. Theory X people have never existed, do not exist, will never exist. Where do we stand now? Nobody has learned anything from that. People still believe that theory X's exist, that there are some in our organizations. And here it's really worse than in other companies that can do great stuff, But here we have these theory X people, and we have to force them or bribe them or motivate them extrinsically. So we have not gotten out of the mud of the deplorable theory X prejudice. No advancement.
It is easy, but what's basically holding us back is like the outdated software in our head.
But the rest is easy. So it's much about language, about beliefs. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but the method is really, of course, there's method. I with Red 42s, Silke Hermann and I, we developed method for transformation and for how to create the structure of decentralization, how to deal with performance systems in a decentralized democratic way. There are ways of doing that, but the secret sauce is really our beliefs and theories.
So where do you see hope? Are there certain organizations that in your view are further along in this journey to beta? Are there certain organizational models that evolve as a result of applying those beta principles, right? Assuming that this train gathers steam, what kind of places do we end up in?
Yeah, it's not a train yet. I wish it were a train, because I think there are good intentions everywhere, in the agile movement, or people like Gary Hamel. He has been writing about this stuff for 10 or 15 years as well. But you asked about examples as well. So that was, I think, the beauty and the great merit of the Beyond Budgeting research, to do case study research in companies that wouldn't have budgets and command and control and fixed targets and incentives and very little hierarchies, and that were decentralized. So at the time, my colleagues and I participated in that from 2003 on. We found companies that did that. And you might have heard of our most famous case, Handelsbanken, the Swedish bank, which since 1971 is radically decentralized. And they have embedded all the Beta Codex principles in their organization for over 50 years. And they have been Europe's most successful bank as well for over 50 years. Here's the thing. Nobody gives a shit. It's the same like with Toyota. If I live here in Germany, in Wiesbaden, and there's this car company, or there are several car companies in Germany that are successful, but the biggest, you might have heard of them, Volkswagen. Do they give a damn? Do they give a hoot about Toyota's supremacy that has been going on for 50, 60 years as well? Yeah, not so really. They have copied a couple of things, from TPS, Toyota Production System, Lean, and so on. They've done some things, but not consistently, not coherently, which is why they still suffer from everything, Command and control organizations suffer. But the suffering doesn't create insight. And that's what one might call a big learning problem. Command and control organizations are terrible at learning. And command and control in itself, just the suffering doesn't, it's like a smoker who suffers, but cannot get rid of the smoking. That's what command and control organization, Taylorism, alpha organization, as we call it, is like. Good cases do not change anything. Nobody gives a shit about great cases. There are those great cases, the Southwest Airlines, Handelsbanken, Toyota, W.L. Gore, Buurtzorg, the health organization from the Netherlands. Or here in Germany, we have a great retail company, more than 60,000 people, DM Drogeriemarkt, great retail organization. Aldi, in America, they have Trader Joe's. All these organizations, they have done this beta stuff, decentralization, for decades. In Brazil, for example, there has been Semco, a very well-known case. Ricardo Semler is associated with this. These great cases, they don't change the world, and we have to accept that. Cases do not change a thing, because every command and control organization will look at command and control managers in command and control organizations. They will say, yeah, it can work there, but here, no.
So how do you, like when you deal with leaders that's saying, hey, Niels, I get it, I get these principles, but how do you get them comfortable that they kind of need to rip out everything that they have and replace it to a certain degree?
I do not see executives asking this question. Well, you're suggesting for us to throw everything away or so. I don't see that. The executives I have the luck to talk to, usually they have been through all these reorganizations. They have tried all the consulting firms, the big consulting firms. They have tried all the tools. One of our transformation clients, for example, an entrepreneur with a company of 120 people or so, he had recently tried OKRs out of hope, and failed with that dramatically. Everything went wrong with that stupid method. And then he said he found out about our work, and we, of course, he had to throw out all the stuff that he had done over the previous 5 years. But he said, what's the problem with that? If it doesn't work, let's throw it out, toss it out of the window. And the reality is that the Beta Codex model, decentralization, the Toyota way, however you want to call it, or the Southwest Airlines way, or the W.L. Gore way, this kind of model, it's delightfully simple. It's much simpler than command and control. Command and control is very complicated. You need a lot of stuff, annual planning, steering mechanisms. You need to punish people, performance appraisal. All these things belong on the garbage heap of history. They are not part of the solution. They are part of the problem. Now, there are a lot of smart people out there who know that all these things are problems, like incentives and bonus systems, performance appraisal, budgeting. Read about beyond budgeting, you will read a lot about how useless and toxic it is. However, it's not so easy to understand the alternative. If it's so simple, how does it work? This alternative, this Toyota way thingy, And the answer is that once you put the periphery in charge, put small teams in the organizational periphery in charge, and the center serves the periphery so that the periphery can serve the external market. Once you do that, organization-wise, things become very, very simple. I remember an anecdote, the founders of the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, when they visited Handelsbanken for one of the first times, maybe the first time, they met the CEO, and they told the CEO, wow, what you're doing here at Handelsbanken, it's so sophisticated. And he said, boss, stop there. What we at Handelsbanken do is not sophisticated. It is extremely simple. And it is only 3 hierarchical layers, no annual planning, no strategy process, no bonus system. It's no steering mechanisms, very few meetings, no business units even, which is crazy, no product managers, no marketing department. It's very simple. And that, of course, this rings a bell because running a business with hundreds of thousands of tens of thousands of people shouldn't, as a model, be more complicated than running a business with 10 people, or 7 or 10 or 50. It should be just more cells doing the business, but it shouldn't be that quantity. It shouldn't result into stacking the organization or scaling, as we now call it sometimes in Agile. It should result in, cell division, blub, 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 and having more of the same. It should be very simple and organic, which organizations today aren't, because they are still addicted to the wrong model. Yeah. So yes, we have to rethink, we have to contemplate, we have to change our mind about organizational theory and practice and tools as well.
I think that's very interesting when your point about like the teams being on the periphery serving the market. It's like at the center. It's like has like an implied servant leadership model. We're basically saying management's role is to create conditions for those serving the customer to succeed.
Exactly. Management executives should create the conditions, go out of the way. At Handelsbanken, the Swedish bank, they have apparently this saying in Swedish, which is like, the art of the top executives is to sit on their hands, put it under your butt and leave the hands there. Don't jump to action. But it's something that's very intuitive to organizations. The CEO of W.L. Gore, she got it right 10 years ago when she described this as her role, that her main role was to attract excellent people for Gore. So the CEO as a marketing figure to attract talent for the organization, but not to steer the organization, control the organization. That is a command and control ideology already. I think all these notions about leaders and leading, they are very much command and control ideology. We should drop those terms, those words. Leadership is a force between people. It happens in a space between people when they work together with each other, for each other. That's where leadership unfolds or emerges. But leadership is never something that somebody does. So we shouldn't make too much of it. If you talk about heroes at the top, you will also tend to blame people. Where there is hero worshipping, there is also blame, assignment of blame. And that is totally toxic. It's like what kryptonite is to Superman, that is what blaming and heroism is to great organization. Self-organization cannot accommodate heroism, hero worshipping and blaming. That's why Toyota doesn't allow blaming inside. Of course, Handelsbanken doesn't either, or Southwest Airlines or these organizations. Excellent organizations do not allow blaming, because then you can never get to the root of things. You can never understand the problem under the symptom. To drill down and understand problem at the roots, you must have the humility not to assign blame, and that is it's still a lesson to learn in most organizations, to put it like that. What's keeping organizations from becoming decentralized, highly self-organized? We have known the solution forever, at least since the sociotech movement of the 1960s, 70s. We have known pretty much what the solution is, how to decentralize and so on. What's keeping us, and the reflexes, those are some of the reflexes: hero worshipping, blaming, the belief that leaders exist, the belief that steering works, which makes us do planning and other horrible things. And steering in complexity doesn't work, because complex systems cannot be steered. Period. That's it. That should be enough proof to abolish all organizational planning that there is in the world, including ridiculous strategic planning and canvas bullshitting and so on. There's a lot to abolish.
What you're talking about is like how we work in an organization. But I think it's definitely possible to be an organization that doesn't work in this way, that still has a fantastic product. Right? But I absolutely agree. I think it's like, all things being equal, right? Products are pretty much the same. I think having a beta culture and setup would probably be a sustainable competitive advantage, because you're just tapping into more of people's brain power. So instead of having 40 highly paid managers that do all the thinking, maybe now we got 4,000 people that are all looking out in the marketplace, all bringing back trends and insights, all taking part of ownership in steering the organization. I think you can have a very successful business with a great product and have none of these characteristics in place. Would you agree?
With a lot of suffering, a terrible car company can churn out a decent car. Sometimes I'm surprised that it works. This model still works, and that they churn out decent cars, but it works. But there's so much blood in that, and here the value just flows. That's what we can learn from Toyota and Southwest Airlines and others.
I think the real victims in this model, I think, are really the people working in an organization.
Yes. It's terrible to work in a command and control organization. It's endless suffering. The meetings, the terrible decision making, the waste of time, the lack of, you cannot even dedicate your time to the work in a normal bank today. I once met a branch manager at Handelsbanken, and he told me, I came to Handelsbanken from another bank because here at Handelsbanken I can be a manager and I can do business. I can visit clients. I can do business. It's so much fun, he said. And yes, you're totally right. The suffering is not just of employees, but also of managers. You're totally right.
And by and large, I think you're just going to have more opportunities to tap into the collective intelligence, creativity, and so forth. So in the US, this takes right now the context of what we're calling the Great Resignation, right? We're coming out of the pandemic. People had a lot of time to sit at home and say, what do I want from work? What do I get from work? And saw a big difference and decided, right, to do something else, right? Go to maybe smaller organizations, maybe, right, retire early, go different, take a different approach. Questions: do you see the same happening in Europe or in Germany where you are? That and does it translate into managers starting to realize that they gotta change the work product to be more attractive to people?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, we have this quiet quitting discussion in Germany or in Europe as well. In some countries, maybe in England, this is stronger than in Germany right now. So yes, I think by and large we have the same movement, and I think people have at Gallup, they are probably looking like that and saying, "I told you so, told you so," because the data hasn't changed. When people join an organization, 100% are highly committed, and that then drops the highly committed number share of employees drops to 20%. Why do you think that happens? Everybody's committed on the first day at the new company, and then boom, that goes to 20. It's not because managers are dumb. It's not because the products suck. That's not the problem. Or because the work is bad. People make up the story, or we have been making up the story that people become disengaged at work, the Gallup thingy, because the work is bad. That's not the problem. People do the worst kind of jobs if it's well paid and if it produces. I mean, we want to contribute. As human beings, we want to be part of something greater. We want to contribute. We want to perform with each other, for each other. That's what Theory Y, Douglas McGregor's Theory Y, is all about. In a way, we are hooked on wanting to find joy at work. So why does the number drop from 100%, first day of new workplace, new company, to 20%? Because organizations suck. Organizational models are terrible. The problem is not the quality of the work. In a way, the quality of the work is eroded because command and control just sucks. It's horrible. It's terrible. And I think, no, we are not terrible companies that are now suffering the loss, the drain, of the people drain. Companies are not by themselves. Companies do not think, but managers, executives, they're not drawing the right conclusions right now. I think they are drawing wrong conclusions. For example, that we have too few people, or people are lazy, or we have to whatever. They're drawing strange conclusions. I don't see the right conclusions being drawn.
But that's a work design question, right? So in that sense, I think I've been listening to you, and I think people actually dislike oftentimes the work without even knowing it, because right, same as Beta Codex, right? Those principles have been proven out, right, over 5 decades, and we're kind of ignoring them at our own peril. I think we're also ignoring at our own peril what we know makes a good job. And I think there's some interesting parallels that I see, and maybe that's just a space that I'm super excited about, right? But right, we know that people want to do something that's meaningful, right? They want to do something from start to finish. They want to use a couple of different skills. They want to know that what they're doing matters to somebody. And they want to have autonomy in figuring out how that work gets done. And they want to know how they're doing, right? So for me, that boils down to a design question, though, right? Because somebody made the decision as like what this job is about, and right, the job description, as Bill Passmore said, it not only defines what your job is, but also says what your job is not. And so I think a lot of people go to work in these organizations, and the work is terrible because every day there's a little less autonomy, there's a little less decision making, there's a little less sense of like what the overall thing is that we're here trying to accomplish together. And I feel like that I think is a huge opportunity, is to say, let's step back and let's really create so I can hold jobs that are customer aligned. So we don't need all these managers to tell people what to do and how to do it and so forth.
Yes, managers could do something much, much better. I always tell HR people, yes, we will need, in beta organizations, you need less HR people. That's true. But HR people deserve to do something much more interesting than HR as well. The same goes for managers. There's a lot of value creation to be dealt with in beta organizations, a lot of business problems, actual business problems. But what you said is precisely to the point. Command and control stifles everything: human potential, human motivation, and the joy at work. It's almost impossible in a command and control organization to enjoy the work. And work is the most enjoyable thing. And it's not, again, it's not about the kind of work. At Toyota, for example, which is always, I find that mind-boggling. The car manufacturer with the least amount of automatization in the world. In other words, the car manufacturer with most manual labor to do is Toyota. They are less automatized than the other companies. Still, they are much more profitable, and the work is probably more fun. And why? Because at companies like Toyota, they preserved the pride of craftsmanship, which if you only talk about, oh, machines are better, robots are better, automatization is so great, let's make it digital transformation, upside down. That kills the pride of craftsmanship, of course. It's this kind of tech ideology, Silicon Valley ideology, kills. It's an antidote to pride of craftsmanship. So we also have to take care, beta organizations take great care not to automatize too much, to have people understand with profoundness, with philosophy, so to speak, the value creation, the essence of their value creation. Most organizations have automatized things that are essential. I give you a better example, the best example I think that exists in today's world. One of the things that should be less automatized in the world is recruiting. Recruiting is highly complex. It doesn't bode well to automatize it. But so many organizations are using, external recruiters and softwares to select the right curriculums and pre-selection and whatever, and they do everything with bots and blips and processes and algorithms. There are companies that I know, they are incapable of recruiting decent personnel, decent people, capable people, because their process of recruiting is just too dumb, too automatized, too much, too digitized, so to speak. The opposite, what beta organizations do is the opposite. They let teams recruit new team members. We call that peer recruiting. Don't automatize, take a look. Let humans take a look at the cover letters or curricula or whatever you receive. Let team members do the recruiting, the job interviews, and not external recruiters, not HR people. Don't let managers or HR people make the decision, but let every team member be part of the decision if they care, and they will care.
No, I would 100% agree with you on the technology side, and I feel like, right. I mean, I started my career in the early 90s, and that's when computers really started to take over in the workplace. And I feel that we've been on this 30-year journey where the answer to everything has to be technology. We're throwing more and more money at it, and we're creating bigger and bigger problems for it, right? Because it's so hard to rip out this technology. It's so hard to make all these different tools work seamlessly with each other. And so we just end up putting human beings in the middle as human interfaces and human middleware that gotta type in information from one system into the next system. And so I think that's probably, in my view, the worst of all worlds, right? Where you have technology that doesn't really help to get the work done, but actually gets in the way of doing the work.
The overwhelming share of organizations today is still stuck in command and control mode. If we even consider it normal, and we consider the alternative model, like Southwest Airlines, Toyota, we consider them abnormal organizations. We've gone so far, we've gone so far on the dark side that we consider the light abnormal. Yeah? So organizations in Japan, in Germany, in the US, everywhere in the world, they are infested with command and control ideology. I think this is very important to keep in mind. The ideology is very much in us, assuming that people need to be motivated and extrinsically motivated and forced and bribed and steered and You need to give them orientation and fixed targets. That's ideology. It's philosophy that's deep. Most managers have some, even employees, everybody at work. Most of us have some part of them that believes that this is true, that it works. Theory X is true. There's theory X's who need to be dealt with. And this philosophy, it needs to be, of course, it's like we need a renaissance of humanist thinking in organizations. We need the first renaissance of humanist thinking in organizations. We need to finally embrace democracy at the workplace. But we also need to understand that, taking human beings as what they are, which are self-motivated, capable of self-organization and so on, that this has very specific consequences for the way we should design organizations. I'm very influenced by people like Bill Passmore, as you know, and also colleagues of his like Paul Tolchinsky, who now lives in Phoenix, a great guy who has cared for organizational design for decades. But still, if you look at books about org design, you only find command and control ideology. It doesn't go beyond centralization. And we now need decentralization. I repeat this word over and over, right? Decentralization means giving power to small teams in the periphery, mini teams or cells that work like mini companies, And that is the only way to democratize organizations, to turn even large organization into highly self-organized structures. We need to decentralize them. There's no way around it. And this insight, the coin hasn't dropped in most organizations. It's still a lesson to learn. Once we learn it, there is method of how to transform.
So Niels, if people listen to this and they say, "Oh my God, this makes a ton of sense," right? I mean, how do they learn more about your approach? Where should they go?
The first thing I would say is join the community. The Beta Codex Network is for everyone. It's not just not for profit. It's also a not for business thing. It's just really a virtual thing, and everybody can join. It's open source, so betacodex.org is the website. But also these approaches I talked about, we call them cell structure design. That's the org design approach we created, cell structure design, or relative targets. That's the approach to performance systems that also Bjarte Boxnes talked about a little bit in the podcast episode with him. That's called relative targets. And we also created this approach for organizational transformation. This is not to market the book. It is also to market the book, but no. Here's the thing. This is also an open source approach, and this OpenSpace Beta it's rooted in an approach invented by an American from the East Coast, Daniel Mezek. And he is an agilist, and he had this idea that if you have tons of software developers, like 600 software developers, and you want to help them adopt Scrum, how do you do that? 600 people. You don't want to start with a pilot and then years later the others get to do it as well, and they are forced or bribed to do it. So what if teams got the chance to adopt that very quick? And from this approach of his, OpenSpace Agility, we derived an approach to transforming entire organizations, turning every organization into Toyota within just 90 days. And these approaches work. I'm not saying this to sell the book or anything, but the point is that change management, even the Kotter approach to change, or what we call organizational development, these approaches, the methods we employ there, they usually fail because they lack a set of principles. They lack time boxing. They are too slow. They end fizzling out. I've seen this many times for myself. Maybe you've seen it in your work as well. Change efforts fizzling out, ending nowhere after years and years. So a great contemporary approach to transformation needs to be time boxed. It needs to involve everybody all at once, and then everybody to work the system within a certain time spent, 90 days, as we say. And it needs to be, this kind of change approach, it needs to be as self-organized as the model we want to move to, which is about self-organization and decentralization. So why not involve everybody all at once to work the system, not the people, and then we can get this shit done in 90 days. some of the secrets we only figured them out with this with OpenSpace Beta. Yeah, the time boxing, involving everybody at once, not creating a guiding or coalition, not at all, but to make transformation invitation based. At the beginning of a transformation, somebody, we call that figure the sponsor, needs to ask everybody, do you want to join me, the sponsor, in doing this together for 90 days? Then we will begin in a great open space conference and end in a great open space conference. And in between, we transform the company or the organization in just 90 days.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of open space technology. I think it's a great way to invite people in, right? I mean, the law of 2 feet, right? I think it's beautiful. I think it's simple. And I think it's respectful to say, listen, right? Contribute as long as you want, as long as you can. And if you once you're done, go do something else, right? I just think that's very nice.
And in a way, open space is the open space technology approach developed by another American, Harrison Owen, in the 1980s. It's another way of creating a beta organization on a minor for a moment within this format. Open space is a way of creating beta self-organized, highly radically centralized, decentralized and self-organized conditions, just for the moment, so to speak, of the open space conference. So it's very well, open space technology is very well suited to invite people and to have them sign up and commit to doing the transformation together. Yeah, it's a brilliant approach. Yeah, and to use open space twice to time box the transformation period. That's just a brilliant idea, beautiful idea. And sociologically, there's everything in that my heroes like Kurt Lewin, Eric Trist, Fred Emery, and so on, and also Russell Eckhoff, of course, Marvin Weisbord, those pioneers. They were always looking for ways to engage as many people, to bring the whole system in the room, as one of my friends, Paul Toczynski, says. We need to bring everybody in the room. And that is, I think that's only possible with a method that's so simple as open space. It's very simple, delightfully simple.
So I think that's a really interesting innovation, and I applaud you for that. Niels, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us your thoughts on Beta and what leaders can do to make work more meaningful and productive and valuable and impactful. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to hearing more sessions, more recordings of your podcast. Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, be sure to subscribe, like, share, or comment. Until next time, let's make work matter.